Yes, sir. We are live.
Okay. Dr. Harith, over to you, sir.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for organizing I thank the Indian Chess Society, the UP chapter of Indian Chess Society, to host this evening for the Max Institute of Cancer Care for the lung cancer case capsule. As all of us who are participating here know that the challenge of lung cancer is unbelievably huge. We all see almost 90% of lung cancer in metastatic stage, which is very unfortunate. And even those which are seen there, even though opportunities for treatment remain, the connect between the oncologist and the pulmonologist community is so poor that the best opportunities are not offered to the patient and do not get percolated down. So we at Max have initiated this campaign where we want to engage with the pulmonology community at large at a very extensive scale and want to make sure that we work in collaboration for the larger good. And with that purpose in mind, we requested this evening from Dr. Sudhir Chaudhary and Professor Suryakant, and they very graciously said that we will organize this event. We had one very successful event about a month back with Professor Suryakant, and today is the second such event in that series. And so I don't know whether Dr. Sudhir Chaudhary is there right now or not, but he's the immediate past president of the Indian Chess Society UP chapter.
Yeah, I'm there.
Is he there now?
I'm here. Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, sir. Okay. I think your voice is echoing. So thank you very much. I know he needs no introduction to this society and its members, but it's our honor that I know him personally for 20 years, an extremely humble person. And he's one person who said that I don't want to talk, I just want to listen and learn. So at his age, if he wants to listen and learn, I know that everybody should realize that learning is a lifetime process and that should continue with each one of us. So thank you very much, Dr. Sudhir, for organizing this and being here this evening. Professor Suryakant is the president of the Indian College for Allergy, Asthma and Applied Immunology. He is the professor and head at KGMU in Pulmonology Department, Respiratory Medicine Department, and he is the past president of Indian Chess Society. So he will be giving an overview on lung cancer. So I am sure he's not able to join at present, but as soon as he's there, we will have his talk. But I think, yeah, is he there now? Can somebody check out? 1 second. Yeah. So he's not yet logged in. He's there, but I think he's caught in some emergency. So we will have his talk soon after the case capsule. So we will start with the case capsule on lung cancer. And before I do that, I want to give a brief introduction of Max Oncology Program. So we started in 2009 and 2019, we had our celebration of the first decade. And in first 10 years, we are now a team. We started with a handful of oncologists. Today, we are almost 100 oncologists who are working on a DMG structure, that is disease management group structure. We are all divided into 10 DMGs, neuro, head and neck, GI, thoracic, gynae, uro, breast, MSK, hemat, BMT, and pediatric. So while these different organs are treated by different set of people from medical, surgical, radiation, radiology, pathology, we all back end work very closely to make sure that the patient gets the best in terms of delivery. And that is why our tumor board program, our connection with each other is very, very critical. And this is a very comprehensive program from prevention to palliation. We are committed to that. And in the real world, pre-COVID times, we used to have our real tumor boards, physical tumor boards, which we will be starting very soon. Right now, we are having a virtual tumor board. So even today, all patients are routed through the tumor board, where every new patient data is captured by one person shared in the DMG tumor board. We have recently upscaled our software so that the template and the information of the patient need not be relocated. It just comes on the single screen of tumor board, and from there it is picked up to share with other colleagues in the tumor board. So there the decision is taken, what is the line of treatment, and that treatment gets communicated to the patient by a group of people, preferably, though not always. And this is the display which you are seeing on the right side, which we have displayed in our each hospital, that how each organ divides into DMGs, disease management groups. And few of us are looking after 2 or 3 DMGs, but the goal is gradually to come to 1 DMG per person in that specialty. So this is our South Zone Thoracic DMG team, Nitesh, Devrat, and Shefali. They are the medical oncologists who cater to the thoracic or lung cancer challenges from medical oncology perspective. From surgical oncology, me and Shubham Jain are two surgeons, and from radiation, Dr. Charu and Dr. Priyanka are the people who take care of these patients. And the pulmonology department is extremely critical and works very closely. In fact, in our tumor boards, there are regular participants besides the radiologists and the pathologists. And we have today with us Dr. Naveen Kishore, who heads the bronchology division and a senior consultant respiratory medicine. And he will also give the perspective from a pulmonology point of view. So with that, I want to request Nitesh to take over and through this case capsule. And once that is done, then we will come back to the talk from Professor Suryakant. Or Nitesh? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harith, and the entire team of lung cancer pulmonologists who really stood behind this. As Dr. Harith said, it's an agenda with us, which if anybody knows Dr. Harith, he knows how he pushes an agenda till it's achieved and beyond. So it's an agenda to percolate down what we think is cutting edge science, and we'll try and give you glimpses of that. I don't think it's supposed to be an hour and a half. So we'll give you glimpses of that with both case-based and some high technology, which we'll throw in with immunotherapy, targeted therapy. Dr. Charugar will really dazzle you with radiation therapy. And Shubham will really try and show where surgical oncology is headed. To start a thought process, which we find is very useful to think of a patient, a real life, who comes into your OPD one evening, and this is a patient who was stage 3 lung cancer. He was an ex-smoker till 3 years ago, had some coronary issues and stents put in. Otherwise, generally well. Came with a history which is possibly the most common history of cough and hemoptysis. And the cough which was troubling was not bringing him to the doctor, but the minute he had a blood in bulgum, as we call it, he rushed to the hospital, and then therapy and diagnosis started. He had a huge cavitary lesion with some, this is the CT scan and the PET scan. And if you notice that even in this, there was some activity on one 4 o'clock, 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock position, but not on the other. He had a blind FNAC and even a biopsy closer to where he lives. But I guess because it's so necrotic and because the entire thing is not tumor bit fibrotic, it was missed. So we re-biopsied it after the PET scan based on looking at where the activity is. And we have found this not uncommonly, that when you do a PET and follow that by this, things do get better in terms of biopsy. And then we saw the PET scan and we saw that there was some level of activity on the nodal stages as well, but no distance metastasis. So with that in mind, I would like to hand over to Dr. Naveen Kishore. Can I request all speakers to tell me when to shift, and I'll shift. And before I do that, can I very warmly welcome Dr. Suryakant, who I think got stuck with some emergency possibly, but he's been really a guiding light for all of this, and his passion is endearing as to how much he's throwing in both time and effort to make this happen. Warm welcome, Dr. Suryakant. We took the liberty of putting your talk after the case capsule, and we'll change the order slightly if that's okay by you.
I'm really sorry that I was stuck in of course, a big organization called IMA. There was an IMA webinar, and probably I was scheduled to deliver first lecture, but they rescheduled, and my lecture became the third lecture. So that's why I'm 10 minutes late.
Not at all. Not a problem, sir. If you want, we can interrupt. If you want, we'll finish, and then we'll take over your lecture, which is very critical to this whole thing, which is the overview of lung cancer.
Then if you have started the case, you can continue the case.
So we'll do that.
Yeah.
So
this is Dr. Harith. If you think, I don't know what Sudhir Chaudhary's view. Actually, I was supposed to give the overview of this lung cancer management.
That's right.
Indian lung cancer scenario.
That's right.
If you have just started, I don't know what kind of Dr. Naveen
just started. If you want to come in, you just you give your talk.
So
I'll do
it
that.
is better. It is better that I deliver my talk. It's very small talk.
Okay. So
That's
I've stopped sharing, sir. If you can share your slide
Yeah.
on your overview, which, as I said, is very critical, and then we will take over from there and let.
Yeah,
Dr.
that will be more feasible, because in Uttar Pradesh, most of the chest physicians, they are actually involved only till the diagnosis of lung cancer. So they are suspecting lung cancer, they are making the diagnosis, and then they are referring. There, of course, that some centers are the treating centers here. For example, the centers like King George Medical University, Sanjay Gandhi PGI, Loya Institute, and some other centers. So I will, sorry to being late. Of course, my work is very simple, to give an overview and, of course, the Indian scenario of the lung cancer. So this is the story of, this is the global profile, you can say, updated on March 2019. And if you see on the top of the list of the cancer, the lung cancer is the #1 cancer throughout the world. Roughly, there's the incidence of 2 crore cases per year. So that is the situation of the lung. Whether it's, so combining the male as well as the female, the situation is that it is the most common incidences of lung cancer, most common mortality due to any cancer is because of the lung cancer. So you can see here the lung cancer, that is the 11.6% all cases of all lung cancer, they are all cancer, they are attributed by lung cancer, and the 18% mortality of all cancers is attributed by lung cancer. So topmost cancer in the world as far as the incidence is concerned and as far as the mortality is concerned. Then, of course, later on, the second comes the breast cancer, then colorectal cancer, prostate cancer, stomach cancer, liver cancer, and esophagus cancer, and of course, in the last, the cervix cancer. And as far as the mortality is concerned, after the lung, the colorectal cancer, stomach cancer, liver cancer, and then breast cancer and esophagus cancer. So after this, you can see these are the top 5, of course, the causative cancers in the world. The most common cancer is the lung cancer, sorry, 2 million, it's not 2 crore, it's a 2 million. And breast, this is roughly around also 2 million, but a difference of only few thousands. So the most common cancer are the lung cancer, the breast cancer, colorectal and prostate, skin cancer and stomach. And this is the cancer mortality, the lung cancer 1.6 with 1.76 million deaths. So you can see 2 million new cases are coming and 1.76 million are dying. So mortality is also very high with lung cancer. And of course, the second is the colorectal, third is the stomach, liver, breast is the fourth. Now, this is the estimated number of lung cancer in the world and India. So this is the estimated increase you can see in last 7-8 years. If you see the globe, from 2012 to 2020, the expected increase, the male 25%, female 22%, both sexes 24%. So in 7-8 years, last 7-8 years, there is the expected 24% increase in cases of lung cancer. And in India, this is the India, that second, of course, data is of India from 2012 to 2020. This you can see that this is again 26.4% increase. In India, 2012, the cases were noted 70,000. In 2020, it is expected 88,000. And if we combine with lung and larynx also, then it comes around more than 1 lakh cases. So this is in India also, that it is above the global average. The global average expectation in increase is 24%, while in India it is 26%. Now, these are the various studies of incidence of cases in India, from a very old one, Viswanathan, in of course the 1962 till update by Dr. Behera, Dr. Jindal, Dr. Kashyap. A lot of researchers, they have given the profile. And you can see here the squamous, of course, the debate of squamous versus adenocarcinoma. So you can see here the recent studies, you will find that roughly the adenocarcinoma is now become the first one, roughly around 36% cases, they are adenocarcinoma. And if you see the squamous carcinoma, they are the 32. So still there is a neck-to-neck fight between the adenocarcinoma and squamous carcinoma, but the latest study says that this is around, this is of course most common is the adenocarcinoma. So lung cancer in India, you can see 6.9 means or roughly 7% of all new cancer cases, the 9.3% of all cancer-related deaths in both sexes, commonest cancer and cause of cancer-related mortality in men, highest incidences from Mizoram in both males and females. The time trends of lung cancer show a significant rise in Delhi, Chennai, and Bengaluru in both sexes. The incidence and pattern of lung cancer differ as per geographical region and ethnicity and largely reflect the prevalence and pattern of smoking. Mizoram is high because of smoking pattern is very high. The overall 5-year survival rates of lung cancer is very dismal, with approximately only 15% in developed countries and 5% in developing countries. So we are roughly 1/3 as far as the overall 5-year survival in concerned in respect to the global scenario. So that's why we thought that awareness in the fraternity of the Uttar Pradesh is very essential, and I'm really thankful to the Max Hospital, especially Dr. Chaturvedi, Dr. Rawatgi, and his team, that they have wonderfully chosen the Uttar Pradesh. I think they think out of the, you see 12 medical colleges in the Uttar Pradesh who are offering the chest as a specialty for postgraduate learning course. There are 51 medical colleges in the state. And out of the 51 medical colleges, there are only 12 medical colleges who are providing the MD chest as a postgraduate specialty. And in these 12 medical colleges, I don't think, barring a few medical centers, they are involved in the diagnosis and treatment of lung cancer. The few private centers and private clinicians, I would name them, that Dr. A.K. Singh from Kanpur, Dr. Tandon from the Prayagraj, and of course, Dr. Tomar from Meerut and Dr. Tyagi from Meerut. I mean, few reputed doctors in the corporate sectors, in the private sector, also involved in the diagnosis and treatment of lung cancer. But we need more and more sensitization, more and more upgradation in Uttar Pradesh. And I think I must thankful to Dr. Sudhir Chaudhary, who is our patron, who is our guardian in Uttar Pradesh as far as our respiratory fraternity is concerned, and our dynamic secretary, Dr. A.K. Singh, that these have organized this wonderful, of course, the webinar. And of course, with the help of Max Group. This is the, of course, the stage-wise profile. You can say that non-small cell stage TNM 7th edition, according to this, the 65% patient presenting in stage 4. And in stage 4, you know, survival is very less, the treatment options are very less, and majority of our patients, they are presenting in stage 4. And that's why this is a very pity situation. And as far as the performance status is, ECGO status is concerned, so that is also, if you see the more than 3 and 4 status, so roughly 40% they are in stage 3 and 4, then nothing more than, most of the people, for 40% people, nothing can be done. If you see this, the clinical profile, everybody knows their symptoms are mimicking with pulmonary tuberculosis. And most of our lung cancer patients, they are coming with history of anti-tuberculosis treatment because of these symptoms. Same symptoms as pulmonary tuberculosis present, the cough, hemoptysis, wheezing, fever, and dyspnea. So these are the most common symptoms, of course, along with the weight loss, that coming on mostly they are mimicking with the pulmonary tuberculosis and misdiagnosed. Most of us misdiagnosed, and of course, their diagnosis got delayed. So that's the problem, that we want to sensitization even at the primary healthcare level, primary health centers, at the general physician level. This kind of sensitization we want in Uttar Pradesh, so that more and more, of course, the cases can be diagnosed at early stages, and of course, the misuse of anti-tubercular drugs cannot be done. That has been our primary concern also, that how to reduce this ATD prescription for the suspected lung cancer patient. Then, of course, the symptom profile can be due to primary tumor invasion or regional lymphatic metastasis. The hoarseness of voice because of the left vocal cord paralysis due to tumor invasion or lymphadenopathy in the aortopulmonary window, hemidiaphragm elevation due to phrenic nerve compression, dysphagia due to esophageal compression, chest pain, involvement of pleura and chest wall often dull on and non-localized. Superior vena cava syndrome, of course, we have to orient our people that how to recognize at early stage this superior vena cava syndrome symptoms due to local invasion into mediastinum or lymphadenopathy in the right paratracheal region. Pericardial effusion and tamponade, this can be one of the important presentations. So every pericardial effusion is not tubercular pleural effusion or this is cardiomyopathy or something less. So it's sometime the cardiologist should also have orientation that even their pericardial effusion can be due to, of course, lung malignancy. Cervical or supraclavicular lymph node enlargement. So every lymph node is not tubercular that we have to propagate. Then certain presentation due to extrathoracic hematogenous metastasis like brain metastasis, which may manifest in the form of headache, focal weakness or numbness, confusion, slurred speech, gait instability and incoordination, leptomeningeal or carcinomatosis in terms of headache, confusion, cranial nerve palsy, diplopia, slurred speech, radicular back pain, spinal cord compression. Adrenal metastasis can be, of course, the mid-back or flank pain, costovertebral angle tenderness, adrenal insufficiency due to tumor involvement is rare. This can be simple liver metastasis can be the first presentation. Right upper quadrant pain or tenderness, jaundice, fatigue, fever, hepatomegaly. So of course, the gastroenterologist people should all be oriented that they should investigate in these lines. Bone metastasis. So all orthopedic surgeons, and they should also be oriented that this could be due to metastasis from lung cancer. And sometimes they present with metastasis as the first presentation. So bone pain is spinal cord compression, back pain, muscle weakness, numbness, paresthesia, loss of bowel and bladder control, and constitutional symptom alone can be the presentation for lung cancer. Then, of course, paraneoplastic syndrome, although they are rare, usually associated with the small cell lung cancer, but they should also be considered, they should be kept in the mind so that we cannot miss any rare type of presentation. They can be endocrine presentation due to ectopic peptide hormone production, usually reversible with successful anti-tumor therapy. There can be syndrome of inappropriate ADH secretion in the form of ectopic vasopressin secretion, clinically significant hyponatremia in 5 to 10% of small cell lung cancer, malaise, weakness, confusion, obtundation, volume depletion, nausea, hyponatremia, evolumia, low serum osmolality, of course, appropriately concerned urine osmolality, and normal thyroid and adrenal function. Cushing syndrome can be the rare presentation, ectopic adrenocorticotropic hormone secretion due to this. This can happen. Weight gain manifested by weight gain, moon phases, hypertension, hyperglycemia, generalized weakness, high serum cortisol and ACTH levels, hypernatremia, hypokalemia, and alkalosis. So this can be the classical presentation of Cushing syndrome, maybe due to because of lung cancer. Then neurological symptoms in terms of acute cerebral degeneration, encephalitis, or sensorineuropathy can be one of the rarest presentation for these. And of course, Eden-Lamont syndrome that present with weakness and autonomic dysfunction because of blocking of the calcium channel and production of calcium channel antibody. Calcium cannot go into the channel, its channel inside the cell, so there is, of course, the weakness. Cancer-associated retinopathy, hematological manifestation can be in terms of anemia of chronic disease, leukomyte reaction, and of course, sometimes the Trousseau syndrome in terms of migratory thrombophlebitis. So you just think of rarest and rare presentation and cause can be lung cancer. So I think those who are working or those who want to work in the field of lung cancer, they should not have a tubular vision that it is the, I used to say around 22 years back, I started a campaign in the Uttar Pradesh when people were morely reliable on diagnosis of pulmonary tuberculosis on X-ray. And radiological, you know, the specificity of chest X-ray is only 50% as far as the pulmonary tuberculosis diagnosis is concerned. So since 1996, I started a campaign when I was working as a lecturer in the department. तो मैंने कहा MBBS डॉक्टर्स के बीच में IMA के फोरम पे कि जैसे हर चमकती चीज सोना नहीं होती, वैसे एक्सरे का हर धब्बा टीबी नहीं होती. और तब जाके लोगों को समझ में आया कि we are misdiagnosing the lung cancer. तो डॉक्टर सूर्यकांत ने ये नहीं कहा कि आपकी गलती है, आप लंग कैंसर क्यों डायग्नोस कर रहे हो. उन्होंने एक दूसरी भाषा में कहा कि भाई ये हर एक्सरे का धब्बा टीबी नहीं है, जरा दिमाग को खोलिए, पर्दे के दूसरा खोलिए, पर्दा दूसरा स्क्रीन तैयार करिए, and you should think of some other diagnosis also. But even in Uttar Pradesh, we have to do a lot. So diagnostic tools which we have, of course, is still clinical, because if you don't have the clinical sense, if you don't have the clinical acumen, you cannot suspect. When you cannot suspect, you cannot investigate. So suspicion, early clinical suspicion for the lung cancer is a very important first step in the diagnosis of lung cancer. Radiological manifestation, we have to, of course, differentiate whether this is tubercular, whether this is malignancy, what kind of fever, what signs. Especially Dr. Sudhir Chaudhary is the master of radiology, chest radiology, and he used to teach the whole of the Uttar Pradesh regarding this, what sign favors pulmonary tuberculosis, what sign favors lung cancer, and what sign favor some other diseases. Bronchoscopy, now we have very good centers in Uttar Pradesh. A lot of youngsters, they are doing bronchoscopy, and even they are the faculty members at the national conference and bronchology conference. So from north to south, the middle of the UP and the eastern part of the UP, this is still lacking in terms of the interventional pulmonology. So we are planning some other kind of CME conferences and webinars. Last year also we organized the lung cancer conference, and a lot of people from UP attended. And this time also Dr. Hari Chaturvedi and team from Max Hospital is organizing in the month of September, and probably you will see that most of the people, this is my pleasant duty of my secretary, Dr. A.K. Singh, that's to sensitize the people of the Uttar Pradesh to get maximum registration from Uttar Pradesh. And I guarantee that, Dr. Harit, you will get the maximum registration from Uttar Pradesh in your conference. So interventional radiological guided FNAC and biopsy should be done, appropriate histological diagnosis from other sources. For example, sputum, lymph node, metastatic sites, pleural effusion evaluation, staging should be done with the help of EBUS. So a lot of centers now having EBUS also. For example, Sanjay Gandhi PGI, KGMU, and a few other centers, even in private centers, now people are having EBUS, doing EBUS, and of course, practically getting the experience as well as the advantage of practicing EBUS. So, of course, next step is the pathology and molecular diagnosis. This is the era of molecular diagnosis. So I think we have to update our pathologists also. So I would suggest that we were not able to encourage more and more pathologists in our conference held on the 15th and 16th December 2019, but this is your pleasant duty. And I'm aware of this association called Association of Lung Pathology. And Dr. Ritu Kulshrestha, which attended my conference, she's from Patel Chest Institute. She's the secretary. You can coordinate her, and the pathology people can also be invited. So interested pathology of lung pathology people, they can attend your conference. Dr. Ritu Kulshrestha from Patel Chest Institute. She is the Secretary General of the Indian Association of Lung Pathology.
Noted, sir, noted.
Thank you. So you can contact. Last time she delivered a very good talk in our conference. And of course, the diagnosis and subtyping by tissue sample for diagnosis, molecular testing, EGFR, ELK, ROS, BRAF. So many molecular markers are now available. And of course, the targeted therapy can be planned depending upon its possibility. And then, of course, immunohistochemistry for the decreasing the NSCLC NOS subgroup. And we know that around 10 to 30% of non-small cell lung cancer remain untypable on morphological assessment. So this group is, of course, to be discussed with the pathology people, how to differentiate them. And immunohistochemistry and, of course, the immunochemistry needs to be performed in such cases to accurately subtype the type of lung cancer. And histological type, we have different panels for the immunohistochemistry. For adenocarcinoma, we have TTF1, CK7, NAPSIN-A, mucin. Squamous cell carcinoma, CK5, CK6, P63, and P40. Small cell carcinoma, large cell endocrine carcinoma, we have CD56 and synaptophysin, chromogranin, and a combination of markers can also be used. In KGMU, we have the facility. We have very advanced department of pathology, and we have also in Lohia Institute and Sanjay Gandhi PG Institute. Almost all type of immunohistochemistry markers are available in Lucknow. But Lucknow is not only the face of Uttar Pradesh. We have 75 districts in Uttar Pradesh. And these 75 districts are not Lucknow. So we have to, of course, sensitize people, the pathologists, the private pathologists, and we have to sensitize our clinician how to use these immunohistochemistry markers and the, of course, for the particular subtyping of the diagnosis of lung cancer, and then planning of the treatment. So this is the global profile of the various, of course, the mutations, drive mutations. The KRAS is 25%, EGFR is 17%, ALK is 8%, and so many others. In India and Asia, EGFR is the most common type in contrast to this global scenario. Now, performance status is very important. I used to ask my junior resident first year when he joined MD that if you are going to diagnose lung cancer or if you are dealing with lung cancer, you are writing the history of suspected lung cancer, then first you should know performance status. This is not that you have the bronchoscope, you put your bronchoscope to everybody. If patient is not having very good performance status, why did you want to perform so many investigations? If you cannot offer the various kind of specific therapy, then don't unnecessarily investigate. It is not guaranteed that you will diagnose the case and you will treat the case. There are so many cases. वो बाद में हम लोग हमारे गुरु कहते थे कि साहब when we have to offer nothing, तो हम लोग कहते हैं कि भैया गंगा जल और तुलसी दल, दो चीजें याद रखिए, गंगा जल और तुलसी दल. So some patient is still, they are the of course deserving candidate for ganga jal and tulsi dal. Don't try something else. So don't investigate invasively. That is my personal viewpoint. I think guideline will also suggest that performance status beyond 3, they are futile exercise to make the pathology, to make the histology, because you don't offer the, of course, aggressive treatment. They are unable to, of course, tolerate it. So, of course, everybody should know performance status. 0 is as per the ECOG, Eastern Cooperative Oncology Group. This is the latest practicing performance status scale. 0 is fully active. Patient is fully active. No performance restrictions. No activity restrictions. Patient आता हुआ मस्ती से झूमता हुआ चला आ रहा है आपकी क्लिनिक में. Performance status 1 means strenuous physical activity restricted. Fully ambulatory and able to carry out light work. Light work कर सकता है, but थोड़ा restriction है, जो exercise नहीं कर सकता है. Strenuous activity नहीं कर सकता है. Performance status 2 is capable of all self-care, but unable to carry out any work activities up and about more than 50% of waking hours. 3 is capable of only limited self-care, confined to bed or chair for more than 50% of waking hours. 4 is completely bedridden, cannot out any self-care, totally confined to bed or chair. If you do bronchoscopy, he will die on table. Of course, this is the latest staging, 8th TNM staging. And I used to ask my resident that, of course, they should go through this staging, a very exhaustive kind of thing. When we were the resident, we used to learn very simple staging, but this is the 8th staging, 8th time modification have been done. But as a youngsters, as a resident, they have to remember what is T1, less than 3 centimeter, what is T2, 3 to 5 centimeter, or involvement of main bronchus with carina, regardless distance from carina. And the stage 3 is tumor size between 5 to 6 centimeter in greatest dimension, or tumor of any size that involve chest wall, pericardium, phrenic nerve, or satellite nodules in the same lobe. And T4 is the more than 7 centimeter in greatest dimension tumor, or this has involved the opposite side of the lung. Then, of course, N1, N2, and N3, when N1 is the ipsilateral peribronchial hilar lymph node, N2 is the ipsilateral mediastinal and subcarinal node, and of course, N3 is the contralateral lymph nodes. And M1, we have the distant metastasis. M1A means the tumor in the surrounding area. M1B means the single extrathoracic metastasis, and M1C means multiple extrathoracic in bone or other organs. Then we have the NCCN classification of lung tumors 2020, very simple. This can be non-small cell cancer and small cell lung cancer. Non-small cell lung cancer can be adenocarcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma, adenosquamous carcinoma, large cell carcinoma, or sarcomatoid carcinoma. And of course, the around 10 to 20% cancer in India, they are the small cell carcinoma. The treatment is concerned, there are 7 pillars of treatment for the treatment of lung cancer. This can be used alone or in combination. For example, surgery is the first preferred choice treatment, but can be done in early stages only. Then, of course, radiotherapy, chemotherapy, targeted therapy, immunotherapy, and of course, in last but not the least, best supportive care when patient is bedridden. So what are the factors to be taken into account before planning the treatment? The histology, stage of the disease, performance status, affordability, ability, of course, whether I'm really able to offer the treatment or I have to refer some other center, and of course, availability of the treatment. So these are the 6 points to be remembered, to be thought before planning the treatment. And as we know, that by simple chart, if you go through the tumor stage here, nodal stage on y-axis, and then of course the metastasis, and by all 3 conglomeration, you can identify, yes, this is the disease, and then according to the disease, you can plan the treatment. And this is the disease-wise treatment. For example, first stage, the incidence is only 15 to 20%, means very less patient coming in the stage 1. Treatment choice is surgery. The 5-year survival rate is usually 60 to 80%. So that is the guarantee. If surgery is possible, then 5-year survival can be possible. So lung cancer is not so dreadful situation in nowadays. And if you are diagnosed in stage 1, then you can give the guarantee of 5-year survival for this stage 1 lung cancer. In stage 2, only 5 to 10% are, of course, presenting. The choice is surgery plus chemotherapy, and 5-year survival is around 50%. Stage 3, 30 to 35% cases presenting here, and combined modality therapy can be done. Surgery chemotherapy and immunotherapy can be combined. So combined modality can be tried in stage 3. And the 3-year survival is 57%, 5-year survival is 15 to 25%. In last stage, majority of the patient presenting here in last stage in 3 and 4. So roughly 80 to 90% patient presenting in 3 and 4. The choice is immunotherapy, combined chemotherapy, targeted therapy, and of course, the survival rate is only 2 years, only 54% 3 years, and 45% 2 years. So, and for the small lung cancer, this is the NCCN guidelines. And of course, one can go through the preferred regimen for the limited disease and for the extended disease. And most of the time, surgery is not possible. So such kind of chemotherapy can be offered. And this is again the preferred regimen for the extensive disease. And last but not the least, we should always think of supportive therapy. For example, recurrent pleural effusion is there, TAP, tube or pleurodesis can be done. Pneumonia treatment can be done. Also, obstructive pneumonia is most of the common presentation, and you have to treat it. Pain management has become a super specialty now. Here in KGMU also, there is a pain clinic run by anesthesia people, and we used to refer them in the terminal stages of lung cancer for this pain clinic. Every institute should have pain clinic management, because ultimately patient not interested in his skills. Patient is not interested in your knowledge. Patient is not interested in your degrees. Patient want relief. If you are a very good chemotherapy specialist trained from Tata Memorial or from Sloan Kettering, New York, but if you are unable to provide the relief, then of course you are useless for him. So pain management is a very important issue. Terminal care is very important issue for these patients. COPD, associated problems, COPD, they should also be tackled, because patient may be dyspneic because of underlying COPD problem, and you are just tackling the lung cancer diagnosis. So always you think of whether patient was having history of COPD previously. So continue the inhalation therapy, nebulization therapy, whatever you have planned, so that at least COPD symptoms can be treated effectively. And of course, patient should get relief. You should not forget that, of course, tubular vision with lung cancer, I'm a lung cancer specialist, only think of lung cancer. No, he's not a lung cancer patient. He's a patient. Patient may be presented with so many complaints, maybe pulmonary, maybe extrapulmonary. And in pulmonary also, lung cancer plus ILD, lung cancer plus COPD, lung cancer plus asthma, lung cancer plus post-tubercular, of course, obstructive airway disease. So many things can happen. And the various kind of common presentations, common symptoms like cough, dyspnea, nausea, vomiting, anorexia, weakness, neuropathy, they should be considered. patient should be listened properly, and patient should be given symptomatic relief. I used to tell my resident that on first visit, whether you have not done a single investigation, on first prescription also patient should have complete symptomatic prescription. If you are not giving the symptomatic patient, you will declare as a defaulter doctor, and patient will not return to you कि डॉक्टर साहब ने तो 10 इन्वेस्टिगेशन लिख दिए, एक दवा हमको नहीं लिखी और एक आराम नहीं मिला. So such kind of scenario should, this is India, this is not Europe, this is not US. We have to follow. हमारे एक गुरु जी कहते थे कि चाहे होम्योपैथी हो आप स्पेशलिस्ट, चाहे एलोपैथी हो, सबसे पहले तो आपके पास सिंपैथी होना चाहिए. आपके पास पेशेंट आ रहा है सिंपैथी के लिए, ना कि होम्योपैथी और एलोपैथी के लिए. वो तो उसको बाद में पता चलेगा कि आपके पास कितनी होम्योपैथी है और कितना एलोपैथी है. So the real challenges in India and in Uttar Pradesh, the delays in diagnosis is still, this is the big issue. I think Dr. Sudhir Chaudhary, Dr. A.K. Singh, and all my colleagues from the UP chapter of Indian Chest Society, all my colleagues from different 12 higher departments of the 12 medical colleges who are running the chest department, MD chest in their institutions, they agree that delay in diagnosis is a big challenge in Uttar Pradesh also, in other states also, because of lack of sensitization of primary care physicians, misdiagnosis of pulmonary tuberculosis, and diagnostic facilities not universally available. So I'm really again thankful to Dr. Harit Chaturvedi and his team through, of course, the Max Hospital, because they have joined hands with Uttar Pradesh Indian Chest Society and the leaders like Dr. Sudhir Chaudhary and Dr. A.K. Singh to propagate this specialty into the chest physicians of the state. Treatment-related issues, the manpower insufficient, no qualified. You know, you don't find the bronchoscopy technician, thoracoscopy technician, PFT technician, because there are a lot of ECG technician training is there, a lot of X-ray technician is training there, ECG training is there, optometry technician training is there, but hardly any institute offering the PFT technician, bronchoscopy technician, respiratory therapist technician, respiratory technician training, hardly. So that is the technician part. The paramedical part is also neglected. We have to train them. So we are autonomous trainer, and we are, of course, informally training them.
So
trained oncology nurses are also lacking. Chemotherapy drugs are toxic, costly, and administration requires expertise. Testing for molecular biomarkers usually not universally available. So these are the issues in UP also and in India also. I think the Max Institute will continue to cooperate, coordinate, and of course, face the challenges. And we, as the leaders in this chest fraternity from Uttar Pradesh, we will also take care and will join hand again and again. And I'm sure that more and more people will join the lung cancer conference, forthcoming lung conference, which of course, first time in history will be the virtual conference, but we will join actively and we will participate actively. Thank you very much. Thank you again.
thank you, Dr. Suryakant. Thank you for the excellent coverage. I just want to make 3 comments because I know Nitesh is edging to come in because of
So I'm just putting it what Dr. Suryakant was saying. I thought
Nelsicon. This is the poster. We will invite and we will expect a lot of abstract submission, a lot of presentations from UP, and with so many leaders from different parts of UP being on the platform right now, we will request you all to join hands and live up to the expectations of Dr. Suryakant that we will have maximum participation from Uttar Pradesh. So thank you very much, Dr. Suryakant. I think you have hit the nail very much at the head that the biggest challenge is delay in diagnosis. I think that's the biggest challenge. And you said everything that glitters is not tuberculosis. So instead of waiting for the signs and symptoms of metastatic cancer to manifest, we have to start suspecting for every little shadow, 1 centimeter shadow, 2 centimeter shadows in the X-ray. You have to suspect that as lung cancer and not start empirical ATT. So that is where we need to fix the situation. So I will briefly request Dr. Ashok Kumar Singh, the pulmonologist and critical care specialist at Regency Hospital, the secretary of Indian Chest Society UP chapter, to have 1 or 2 comments, and then from Dr. Anand Kumar. So Dr. Ashok Kumar Singh, please, for your comments, sir.
First of all, I'm very sorry, sir, because I went to the hospital to handle one VIP patient.
Fully understand, yeah, fully understand.
So Dr. Suryakant had told that the most important part of management is the diagnosis. In 90% patients, we diagnose in stage 3B. It's the difficult problem. And the local trend of practice is everybody starts tuberculosis treatment. And once the patient is having metastatic disease in stage 4, only then somebody do the intervention. So our emphasis should be to make an early diagnosis. We should increase the awareness to all clinicians, not only among the pulmonologists, even the physician as well, that the diagnosis should be made as early possible, because we have something to offer to the patient nowadays. So that is my only comment.
What Dr. Suryakant was saying, don't wait for a node, don't wait for hoarseness, don't wait for effusion. These are all signs of advanced cancer. Don't wait for adrenal metastasis.
Absolutely.
When you have a lesion 1 centimeter, 2 centimeters,
Right.
3 centimeters,
Right.
that's a time to suspect. And wherever, in fact, almost always go on to do a full workup before starting empirical ATT.
Right.
Dr. Anand, are you there, please?
Yes, sir, I'm
Anand
here.
is the
The
department
problem with us is the patients which we are taking care are probably coming too late for us. We're talking that we should not wait for pleural effusion to happen, metastasis to happen. But the problem at medical college, since we are a tertiary care center, we are getting patients who already have metastasis, or we have got already a large pleural effusion where only palliative therapy can be offered. Even then, for us, since we have a JK Cancer Institute, we usually only diagnose the patient and send them to JK Cancer. Where also I don't think the level of technological advancement is there. So to most of our patients, we are providing only palliative care, not the therapeutic care.
But my one question to you, sir, that most of these patients who you see with advanced disease, they are already on ATT for varied periods. So my submission is that the empirical antitubercular treatment has to be stopped somewhere. That is where we need to intervene.
No,
So when I was at Rajiv Gandhi, we did a study of about 6 months' time of 400 cases, rather 400 cases. And of these cases, 65% had ATT for more than 6 months' time before they were diagnosed with lung cancer. So I think that is where we lose the battle.
Now, with the coming of GeneXpert and CBNet in both in government sector and private sector, the incidence has probably decreased, because everyone is, even if the sputum is not able to produce sputum, we are getting at least CBNet done or GeneXpert done. We are getting more specific if it comes to, even CBNet is coming negative. Then probably people started thinking that it may not be tuberculosis. So probably the scenario has changed a bit, and the incidence of antitubercular treatment to such patients have decreased, but not to the extent which we expect for last 5 years. But
What's that early
Dr.
CT scan offering may be a critical intervention.
Yes, sir,
Dr.
definitely,
Harith,
definitely.
can I intervene slightly? And maybe Dr. Sudhir, I'd really like your comment on this.
Yes.
But to my hearing, it sounds like we need an algorithm between the pulmonologist of this very esteemed community, the entire group, and ourselves, of even if a patient is starting on ATT, and even if empirically, at what stage and what time should we intervene? And all of that should be data captured prospectively so that we know in the future. And a very small, maybe a small app which we can help develop, which will only be meant for shifting or questioning patients on ATT. Could this be a cancer in the setting? That's my submission, Dr. Sudhir. Your opinion would be very valid.
Very aptly put, Dr. Nitesh. That could very well be a solution. Another question that I had to Professor Suryakant and Dr. Anand was that how many times is a CT scan being offered to patients who are empirically started on ATT in your practice? Because a CT scan could potentially at least alarm someone.
Suspicion.
So as to the possibility.
No, at our center, we are now the number of incidences of empirically starting ATT has drastically dropped down at our center, what I can say. We definitely go for, if you are not able to get it done through sputum examination or GeneXpert examination, we definitely go for CT scan, and the number of CT scans we are doing are much more as compared to last 2 years. So choice of going for empirical ATT has dropped down a lot of more. Even we are doing bronchoscopy to get final diagnosis before starting antitubercular treatment. But
and Dr. Anand, has that led to an increase in diagnosis of lung cancers, or probably stage migration, that your stage 4 patients are getting detected in stage 3 now, probably?
Probably only 10 to 20%, not more than that. Not more than that patients we are able to diagnose earlier as compared to previous, by doing early bronchoscopy or by doing early CT scan. We are probably offering more investigative procedure in terms of CT guided biopsy or bronchoscopy or TBNA or other things. or USG guided biopsy, whatever. We are giving earlier investigative procedures to get them early diagnosis before going for antitubercular treatment, starting antitubercular treatment.
I think
Before I hand over to Nitesh, I'll request Dr.
just
Chaudhary.
one comment, sir, because more than 70% patients are treated by the general physician, not only the pulmonologist. They come to the pulmonologist in the later stage. So the disease is already advanced. I'm working in the tertiary care center. We never start it empirical. CT scan is the routine investigation. And we always do the tissue diagnosis by whether it is thoracoscopy, EVAS or EUS, whatever it is. We have all facilities. We never start ATT nowadays on empirical basis. The patient come late.
Yes, sir.
Most of the time comes in non-operative stage. In the last year, even I have not diagnosed a single case of operative stage where the surgery can be offered to the patient. That's the problem.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Dr. Chaudhary, your comments on Nitesh's idea of having an app. Sir, your audio is off.
Yeah. I'm switching on the audio. Actually, I'm very much interested that the training should be given to the doctors, not only to the chest physician. Chest physicians know quite well, but actually the people, the first consultation, first referral unit or by the patient is GPs. So I want that GPs should be shown the X-rays that this is cancer, this is TB. I mean, some presentation should be made that this is likely to be TB or cancer. And then that turned out to be cancer or turned out to be TB. So actually, if the GPs will refer to the chest physician, only then the chest physician would have a say.
Correct.
That is why Suryakant said that a lot of cases come in stage 4. And while Anand Kumar and AK Singh are working specific, I mean, the cases coming to them are from directly coming to them, they are referring to those cases. So that is why GPs are the prime target for the training.
Yes, sir.
Sir, I think I'll take the liberty of introducing this very esteemed group to both a friend and a group that can very easily develop an app for the entire physicians, GPs, and pulmonologists of UP to begin with. We can do that as a pilot and see what comes out of that.
You can even launch it at Nancy College.
Yes, sir. I think we can do that. Thank you. Dr. Harit, can I take over?
Yes, please, Nitesh, please.
Okay. So thank you very much, Dr. Suryakant. I really appreciate that talk because it kind of put the entire scenario in perspective. We will now go through more or less what you said, but in small case capsules and emphasize right at the pinnacle of that. But as we all know, the diagnosis starts, the diagnosis starts with staging. So first over to Navin on how at a center do we think about staging of a patient who comes with suspicion of lung cancer. Navin, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nitesh. And I'm grateful to the UP Chest Association, and it was an excellent talk, Dr. Suryakant. We've met at many forums, but the way you put everything concisely, you've made it very easy for us to take this case forward. And what you said absolutely is right, and that's the whole point, and that's what we are discussing, is trying to diagnose cancer early. So I'll just cover a little bit here, Nitesh, if you can. Yeah, here we are. So bronchoscopy was a great tool that came up about 30-40 years ago. But in addition to flexible bronchoscopy, EBUS convex probe is probably the most significant milestone in bronchoscopy after the development of the flexible bronchoscope itself, and especially vis-a-vis the treatment of and staging of lung cancer. This tool has become very, very important in our armamentarium to help us to diagnose and to stage, both to pick up early cases also. And I think the points that were being made early, and it's heartening to know that UP now has got a lot of EBUSs in various tertiary institutes, because patients often present with masses in the lung, which cannot be seen endobronchially on the flexible bronchoscope. And when we put our EBUS there, it's a hilar mass, or it's a paratracheal mass, or it's a subcarinal mass, and you just put in a needle and there you are, you've got the diagnosis. These patients would otherwise have been diagnosed as TB empirically and put on ATT. So we have to use the armamentarium that we have, which is the flexible bronchoscope, as well as the EBUS in diagnosis. as well as end staging. Now, with respect to particularly to staging, this is a great article which will substantiate and potentiate what Dr. Suryakant has so eloquently put through and defined all the stages very, very nicely. This is an update on that. This is quite recent, and this will help us for those of us who want to understand it in more detail. I seem to have lost the control, Nitish. Maybe you can take me to the next slide.
I think you have to say next, and I'll keep
Okay, fair enough. So let's go to the next slide here. So when a patient comes to us with a potential case of lung cancer or a diagnosed case of lung cancer, what we try to do is find out whether he is operable, inoperable, whether he's a stage 4 all the way down to stage 1. We kind of work backwards. And I'm not going to go into this because it's already been covered. We can go to the next slide. So the staging and the TNM classification, which we can look into more detail by reading the article. But essentially what we do is we look for a peripheral MET, if it is possible, confirm if there's a brain MET or there's a bone MET or there's a MET somewhere else or a pleural fluid which is positive. And then we work our way backwards to stage it as to a stage 4 or a stage 3 or a stage 2, or then coming to the operable areas. And EBUS here, I'd just like to highlight this, allows the exploration of mediastinal lymph node station 2R, 2L, which is the superior paratracheals on the left and the right, and the 4L and the 4R and the 7. The 7 is often commonly involved. So EBUS, we know, cannot access certain prevascular nodes and certain subaortic nodes, but essentially it helps us very much to pick up the relevant nodes which are positive. We also have ROSE at max, which is rapid on-site evaluation, where while we are doing the EBUS, we are able to see the cytology. Our pathologist sees the cytology. If it comes positive, and if it's an undiagnosed case, we would go ahead and do a cell block. If it comes as a granulomatous pathology and it's an undiagnosed case, we would put that into GeneXpert and AFB cultures, etc. So EBUS helps us in diagnosis as well as in staging. This is a pictorial diagram of what we've been talking about. The bottom line is to try and get them early, number 1. Number 2 is to stage them appropriately so that the treatment can be tailor-made to whatever we think is best for the patient. Here's a little video which shows us doing, this is just last month case. Again, it's now become an outpatient procedure. EBUS is done as a daycare. Patients come in and are home within 2 to 3 hours. It's under, as we all know, it's under conscious sedation, a little bit of midazolam and fentanyl. And the answer is available almost that day. If not by ROSE, then in other centers, it's probably a day or 2. But within a day or 2, you would know exactly how your staging is looking like. This is us doing the EBUS with the PPE kits under the current circumstances. And basically, that's what I want to say. I think that covers me, Nitish.
Thank you very much, Navin. As usual, you do surprise us how you present such a complicated matter in a matter of about 5 minutes. But I guess that's what science and technology is doing to us. And another great example of science and technology is what Shubham speaks about is mediastinoscopy. But more importantly, where is it used, where it's a must, and actually some contraindication. Over to you, Shubham.
Good evening, Dr. Nitish, and good evening, everyone. So mediastinoscopy as a modality helps us diagnose a lot of mediastinal nodes and answers questions of staging predominantly for the patients who are diagnosed with lung cancer. Dr. Nitish, could I request you to go back to the images of this patient, the relevant images, the PET scan images that were there? So I'd like to highlight on this patient itself, the previous one. So if we can see, the lungs on the CT scan appears to be terrible. They're emphysematous because the patient was a prolonged smoker, and for this patient it was actually very crucial because the lesion appears to be involving the chest wall, that should we proceed for a surgery, or rather if the patient would be unfit for a surgery, would we rather opt for a chemoradiation. So for this patient especially, as I remember, answering the question of the mediastinal node involvement was very crucial. because that would have made a hell of a difference for the treatment plan for this patient. So in fact, Dr. Naveen Kishore did an EBUS on this patient and we got a negative report. That is when we decided to proceed with the surgery. But even on the surgery, the nodes that were enlarged on the imaging were actually station 5 and station 6, which is the AP window nodes. And those nodes are not accessible through mediastinoscopy, but we made an attempt to prove these nodes through a left-sided VATS. We send them a frozen section, and that is when we proceeded for surgery for this patient. So this just highlights of the importance of the staging for mediastinal nodes. And this is the algorithm that is followed globally, wherein if the mediastinal nodes are suspected to be positive, we either go for an EBUS or an EUS. And if it still comes to be negative, an EBUS and EUS, and they are very highly suspicious, we go for a video-assisted mediastinoscopy or for station 5 and 6 for a VATS biopsy of those nodes. And we take every step possible to prove whether these nodes are positive or negative, just for the reason that in case of positive nodes, it may actually be a futile thoracotomy for the patient, and the patient would have rather benefited just for chemoradiation alone. Now, that's the importance of mediastinal staging. Now, if I were to talk of the indications for such cases, so all central tumors need to have a formal invasive mediastinal staging, either the EBUS, or if the EBUS is not conclusive or shows negative disease, then these patients need to undergo an invasive mediastinoscopy because these tumors can have a shining through effect, wherein on the PET scan, the image of the primary tumor gets confused and the uptake of the nodes is not differentiable from these. All peripheral tumors more than 3 centimeters in size, or if the CT scan is showing any suspicious nodes which are more than 1 centimeter, or there is a low FDG uptake in the primary tumor, which corroborates to an even lower uptake in the nodes, which could thus fallaciously be reported as negative. Or if there is an N1 lymph nodal involvement on PET, which puts the patient at a higher risk of a mediastinal node involvement, these are the patients who are appropriate for an invasive mediastinal staging. Other examples could be PET positivity if the lymph node is less than 1 centimeter in size. Also, in cases of oligometastatic disease that we take up with curative intent, we take every effort to prove the mediastinal nodes to be negative and only then proceed with a curative surgery. So the following images are of a mediastinoscopy that we were doing recently. So this is when we enter on the anterior surface of the trachea and we are able to see the left main bronchus. The next images. So this is the station 4L or the lower paratracheal nodes on the left side, when we can see a glimpse of the node peeking through the soft tissue. We dissect it further in the next image and we start seeing the node. It is very important to confirm the node by its position by feeling it, because this is an area which is surrounded by blood vessels with a very high flow, and it could actually be a disaster on table if there is a wrong identification. The biopsy forceps are used to then just take some samples from these tracheal nodes, which is then sent for a frozen section evaluation. The next image. And following this dissection, we put in a hemostat in this area so as to control the bleeding. So many a times we get the diagnosis on table of the lymph node involvement, and if there is either a multi-station node involvement, then the patient goes for a definitive chemoradiation. If there is a single station mediastinal node involvement, then we prefer if the patient can be taken up for a neoadjuvant chemotherapy followed by surgery, because that has been seen to improve survival in these patients. So the role of surgical mediastinoscopy, as I was discussing, was when we need more tissue for better pathological characterization of the disease. If there is a clinically high suspicion of mediastinal node involvement despite a negative EBUS, it may also be used as a therapeutic modality for smaller mediastinal lesions. Now, as an example, I am sharing a case of a 60-year-old gentleman, a smoker, who was suspected to have an advanced lung cancer based on the imaging, and he was having extensive mediastinal lymphadenopathy. So the first approach obviously was to, if we were able to prove the disease through the EBUS samples, but unfortunately the transbronchial needle aspiration samples are very less, and with lung cancers or mediastinal lesions, it's tissue is the issue, is what is called. So even in this patient, though the picture was able to confirm a poorly differentiated malignant tumor, unfortunately the tissue was not sufficient for doing an IHC on this to better characterize this lesion. So we took this patient up for a surgical mediastinoscopy, and anybody who's able to do EVAS would be able to appreciate on the quantity of the tissue that we're actually able to take out through the mediastinoscopy. So we were able to get a lot of tissue, and IHC was further done on this tissue. And as a surprise, this tissue actually post the IHC was diagnosed as a diffuse large cell lymphoma based on the IHC. So it does turn the management head over heels, where we are suspecting an advanced lung cancer for a patient vis-a-vis getting more tissue and starting the appropriate treatment for this patient, which is actually a lymphoma and not a lung cancer at all. So this is the example by which where I'd like to highlight of how the need for tissue, which can be obtained through mediastinoscopy, can change the management totally. Obviously, the procedure has some contraindications to it, which are cervical arthritis, which prevents the extension of the neck for the patient. Doing such a procedure in small patients, such as infant and children, comes with its own challenges. Any patient with a cutaneous tracheostomy also cannot be offered video-assisted mediastinoscopy. That's all regarding this presentation. Thank you, Dr. Nitesh.
Thank you very much, Shubham. Again, as I say, you leave me spellbound when we start discussing such a complicated topic, and you show how easy it can be. But most importantly, this patient's survival was dependent on that. I cannot even imagine what would have happened based on that EVIS alone and poorly differentiated. It's very easy to start a treatment plan. If we had not put in doubts and we had not put in discussions and debates, it was easily going to be treated as lung cancer. And that's where I think a very big team and a very important team comes in. And Dr. Harit keeps saying that we have to debate openly, sometimes loudly in tumor board to reach to right conclusions. And I think that's become so critical. But I will take over. I will ask Dr. Chadu to come in at this point, who speaks about radiation in this group and really how can we change the outcomes with some fantastic tools and very usable now. Dr. Chadu?
Yeah, thank you, Nitesh. So I'm basically going to talk about SABR, which is stereotactic ablative body radiotherapy, or commonly known as SBRT, stereotactic body radiotherapy. So let's see, why do we need basically SBRT? So if you see what is the median age of lung cancer at which it is diagnosed, so it is 70 years. And if you see approximately 53% of the patients, they are in the age group of 55 to 74, and a large, more than 1/3 of the patients are over 75-year-old. And as Professor Suryakant said, that the performance status becomes a very big issue. So I mean, in treating in these patients with the surgery becomes difficult. And this proportion of the patients would increase in future because we have got an aging population, and probably now the CT-based lung cancer screening programs are going to get inculcated, and we will start getting patients in early stage. Next slide. So if you see the real world scenario, so the blue line is the surgery, and you can see as the patient hits the age of 65, 70, how drastically it drops down. And this is where we need certain non-invasive modalities for treating these patients. Next slide. So where are we currently? If you see currently the surgical series, they give a 5-year survival rate of approximately 50 to 77%. And SBRT or the SABR, so till now they are the standard of care in medically inoperable patients, and which gives a 3-year survival rate of 42 to 66%. But mind it, these are only retrospective studies, and where the patients went for SBRT or SABR only when they were medically inoperable. So many series, they have reported excellent survival with SBRT in patients who have refused surgery, with 5-year survival rates of as high as almost surgery. Next slide. So this is one of the studies by Iriguchi et al. In 2017, where they saw 88 patients who were operable but refused surgery. So if you see at 5 years, the overall survival was close to 67 to 74%. So these outcomes are apparently similar to those of surgery. But the only problem is we need to get these patients into the study. So next slide. So there was a prospective, next slide, Nitish. So there was a prospective randomized phase 3 study. Two studies were initiated in 2009. One was STAR and one was Roselle. And one was started in US and the other was started in Netherlands. But unfortunately, if you see, both these studies had to be prematurely closed because there was a very poor accrual. So in 2015, Chang et al, he came out with the consolidated result of these two trials. Next slide. And if you can see that the number of patients was very small, it was just 58 patients. And it was from the result of two randomized trials. And here you can see that 31 patients were in the SABR arm and the 27 patients were in surgery arm. Here I would also like your attention to be drawn that how high a dose can be given with SBRT. So here we have given a dose of 54 gray in 3 fractions where the BED is 151 gray. So it is like large as compared to what we do in conventional, where the BED is just close to 64 to 70 gray. So what do we have? Next slide. Yeah. So here you can see the 3-year survival rates with SABR was 95% and with surgery it was 79%. And this difference was statistically significant, although there was no difference in the recurrence-free survival. But since it was a small patient, small size study, so, the conclusions from this study has to be interpreted cautiously. Next slide. And I think we have already seen that PET-CT, it plays a major role in target delineation for the radiation oncologist as well as for the stage assignment. So you can see that 35% of the patients had change in the stage assignment with the PET-CT. And when you have got a fused PET-CT, it results in the target delineation in more than 60% of the patients. You have to change your target. And if you can appreciate on the figure on the left, you can see the only one which is lighted up is the tumor and rest is the collapse segment. Next slide. So this was a case of a 73-year-old female at our institute with no comorbidities, and it was the stage 1 adenocarcinoma. This lady, she refused for surgery, and then we offered her SBRT. Next slide. So here you can see that we place a vesicoil marker under CT guidance. It is done by our interventional radiologist. And you can see in the next slide, you can see that the marker is in the tumor. No, last one, Nitish.
Sorry.
Yeah. And then we give a margin to this gross tumor. And it is just done in 3 fractions. So 3 fractions means a week and the patient is finished with the treatment. In the next slide, you can see the complex planning, what we do in SBRT, 8 or 9 beams IMRT plan. Next slide. And here you can see the results. So this is the pre-SBRT. Then you can see at 4 months, there was a very small thing which was seen on the CT. And at 9 months, there is a complete resolution of the tumor. Next slide. So this is what, SBRT can do. And in lung, as we all know that it is a moving organ and the motion management has to be done very accurately. The extreme left, you can see if you have got a very small margin, your target is going to move out of the beam. Now, and if you want to cover it, then you have to treat large volumes of lung, which again becomes a constraint for us. So then what we do, we have real-time tracking with CyberKnife, or we have got gating-based treatments, which can be done on linear accelerator, where the beam is switched on only when the target moves into the target volume. So this is what, the motion management has to be very stringently done in lung cancer management, either in SBRT or even otherwise also. So what are the advantages of SBRT? So basically it is a non-invasive and it is a OPD procedure. Then it can be easily done in the elderly patients and even the patients who've got COPD or other comorbidities, because our field is very small, we can easily do it. And then there is a potential immunological effect, like radiation with immunotherapy is coming in lung cancer in a big way, even in the metastatic diseases. At times, we have patients from Nitesh and Devrat Arya that, we treat one met to a very large dose, and then they start with their immunotherapy. And although we are yet to see, but now it is reported in the world literature that these patients, they do much better. So, and in centers where, in patients where, tissue diagnosis is difficult, you got a very old patient, the moment we put in a needle, the patient will end up having a pneumothorax. These patients, they can be empirically treated. There are centers worldwide where more than 50% of the patients, they treat them without the tissue diagnosis. And it is it's improved patient convenience, morbidity, mortality is less, and it can be done. It can be done in the patients who have had thoracic treatments as well. There are currently 8 randomized clinical trials which are going on comparing SBRT in the operable patients to the surgery. So, like we were talking about the multidisciplinary teams, and we have got DMGs for site-specific treatment. So this was a systematic review of the same, and it included 27 articles. And it says that, between 4 to 45% of the patients discussed in the MDT or the DMG, they experienced change in diagnostic reports following the meeting. And this is what we see all the time in our DMGs. And the patients who were discussed, they were more likely to receive more accurate and complete preoperative staging and neoadjuvant and adjuvant treatments. So I think MDTs is the the new kid, or it is something which is going to make a lot of difference in the patient management. And then the high volume centers. So as you know that even in surgery, treated in surgery done at high volume centers have a different outcomes to the one in low volume centers. Similarly, in this article from Koshi 2015, they utilized the data from National Cancer Database, and they found that treatment at a high volume center was significantly associated with a higher survival rate for patients with inoperable lung cancer. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Charu. As I said, you do dazzle with technology. But what we've covered so far is a fantastic overview of what lung cancer in India is about. We discussed how we stage people, as Navin showed, from stage 4, 3, 2, 1, and 3 also 3B and 3A, and with a lot of emphasis on that. And then Shubham really showed how mediastinoscopy is very critical, although EVIS has come such a big way, still very critical even to change diagnosis at times. And then Charu showed how we can treat people in less than a week and have the tumor disappear even at 9 months. So clearly, all of this is an era of technology where patients are easier diagnosed and easier treated. But what's interesting is this real big craze that the world is taken by storm. I think the last count, it is a $250 billion industry of immunotherapy. And lung cancer was the poster boy for this after melanoma, which is not so common in India. So really the topic that Devrat Arya will talk about is why the world really going crazy about immunotherapy. Is it just the expensive new technology on the block, or is it useful for some, especially for PDL1 more than 50? Devrat, over to you.
Yep. Thank you, Nitesh, and thank you everyone for this opportunity to talk. Nitesh, you're right. Immunotherapy, especially in lung cancer, has really taken hold of our imagination. I think the first large randomized trials were reported in 2015, and that was in the second line setting, where as compared to conventional chemotherapy, it was clearly shown that immunotherapy was not only more effective, but also was a lot safer. And that triggered a lot of excitement for these drugs, and we've had a plethora of drugs coming into the real world practices. And I think we've had a significant number of immunotherapy drugs now available to us here in India as well for the past 3 years. Next slide. So I'll start with this case. So this case, she was a 76-year-old, rather she is a 76-year-old female who presented with persistent cough. There was no hemoptysis. Typically for an Indian female, there was no history of smoking. She had gone to a pulmonologist where she had initially had a CT scan, which had revealed a lesion in the left upper lobe. Subsequently, she underwent a PET scan, which confirmed that there was this 4.5 centimeter lesion in the left upper lobe. Unfortunately, the PET also showed that there were multiple pulmonary and bone metastases. The FNAC outside was done, which was suggestive of non-small cell lung cancer, and this was the timeline when she was referred to us. And Nitesh, you would agree that whenever we have a patient, a female, a typical Asian female patient, we know that there is a significant chance of these patients harboring a targetable mutation.
Correct.
We also know that patients who are also smokers can also sometimes harbor these mutations, and it's our endeavor to actually have more tissue to not only confirm the diagnosis and the subtype of tumor, but also get enough tissue to be able to do these tests. So we did a repeat biopsy for this patient. The FNA was also already positive, but it was suggestive of non-small cell lung cancer. So we did a biopsy. It confirmed that she had an adenocarcinoma, and we then subjected the tissue for testing for the more common mutations, EGFR, ALK, ROS1, and also PDL1 marker. Now, a lot of these patients now would directly go in for a next generation sequencing. But this is what we did. Unfortunately for her, there was no activating mutation. The PDL1, however, was positive at 80%. Next slide, Nitesh. So the standard treatment options for such patients earlier used to be chemotherapy, and this old standard platinum-based doublet chemotherapy, although was associated with the response rates in the range of about 30 to 40%, the performance was not so good. So expected progression-free survival earlier used to be 5 to 6 months. Overall survival for fit patients used to be in the range of 10 to 12 months. We know from our own personal experience that it's very difficult to use in an elderly population. While not impossible, it is certainly associated with significantly higher number of toxicities, and therefore it's very important, if you were to offer this option to an elderly population, you focus on the performance status, as Dr. Suryakant clearly and very rightly pointed out, and the treatment of the intent remains palliative. Next slide, please. Now, what has happened in the past 2 or 3 years is the movement of immunotherapy to the first line setting from the second line setting. And the first set of trials that was reported was in combination with chemotherapy. And clearly with the results, we know that the combination of immunotherapy with chemotherapy has already changed the landscape of advanced lung cancer treatment in stage 4 disease. Next slide. So we already have data that when chemotherapy and immunotherapy are combined, there is a significant improvement in the overall survival. You can clearly see that the overall survival rates at 12 and 18 and with longer follow-up, longer intervals with the chemo-immuno option remains much higher than chemotherapy alone. And increasingly, we're also realizing that we have a reliable biomarker, which is PDL1. So you can perform a PDL1 on these patients and actually identify those patients who are likely to perform better on the combination as compared to chemotherapy alone, whereas those who have a PDL1 less than 1% may actually be doing as well with chemotherapy itself. Next slide. But what about PDL1 in a higher range of more than 50%? And does it work? And what is the significance? So again, a lot of studies, and this is one of them, Keynote 0124, which actually looked at immunotherapy alone and as compared to chemotherapy. And this was tested in a population who had a PDL1 more than 50% in advanced stage for lung cancer. As you can clearly see, look at the curves. The green curve is immunotherapy alone and the orange curve is chemotherapy. So median PFS with chemotherapy was improved from 6 months to 10.3 months with immunotherapy, and nearly 50% of patients on immunotherapy were free of progression. Similarly, look at the survival. Chemotherapy, median survival 14.2 months. Immunotherapy alone, median survival of 2.5 years. And look at the beautiful tail in both the curves. Look at the green curve, and you can actually see that a significant number of these patients are actually long-term survivors, can live up to as many as 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And we have these patients. Next slide. So what happened to our patient? So she had a PDL1 of greater than 50%. PDL1 was in fact 80%. So we started her on pembrolizumab monotherapy. She had a fair tolerance, a little bit of fatigue and hypothyroidism, which was easily corrected. And look at the scan. After 3 cycles, she had an excellent response. And the PET scan that I put up is actually scan after 6 months of therapy. There's a near complete resolution, a near complete response on the PET scan, which she's been on this treatment now for a year and which has been maintained. Next slide. So I think it's fair to say that the advent of immunotherapy has led to a tremendous progress in lung cancer treatment, particularly in those patients who do not harbor a mutation that can be targeted. Immunotherapy along with chemotherapy is now an appropriate option for most patients in the first line setting. And for those patients who have a PD-L1 of greater than 50%, immunotherapy now offers a chemo-free treatment option. So you don't have to subject them to chemotherapy. You can offer them immunotherapy. There is data now from phase 3 trials also. We have our own clinical experiences to suggest that not only immunotherapy is more effective, it's actually much better tolerated. And the key is the tail of the curve, a significant percentage of patients who are actually long-term survivors on immunotherapy. Thank you, Nitesh, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Devrat. And I think what he very rightly put is the fact that we have now a technology on the block. We have a way to measure where it will work. I know it's expensive, a few lakh rupees, but we know where it works. So to not be able to or not be wanting to give chemotherapy to somebody, give non-chemotherapy option and see them survive for years, and the tail end meant they continue to survive is fantastic. And thank you, Devrat, for pointing that out. But really the question which changed the landscape of lung cancer, which I think all of you who've been there for so many years, and at one point or a few decades ago used to feel that if somebody has metastatic lung cancer, the survival cannot be beyond a year. And that was a fact for us. It was not something which was a fiction of imagination. We used to see people live only for less than a year. And the question is, in the last 2 decades, have we been able to find that cohort of patients where we can make them live beyond a decade? And targeted therapy is one such poster boy, where if you can take a tumor and find which is the abnormality, like a key for a lock, and you use that mostly orally, you can block the cancer pathway. You can therefore block cancer growth. You can therefore block increase in cancer and increase survival. And the question is, can we take it beyond a decade? And then we'll challenge that now with a case of a 56-year-old female who presented with cough and breathlessness, as people do, and this was for 3 months duration. She was widely metastatic right upper lobe mass with opposite lung, liver, bone, and asymptomatic brain mets. We typically look for 2 common mutations seen in almost 40% of population, called EGFR and ALK. EGFR is the surface receptor of the cancer cell, and ALK is a more deeper inside, but of the surface receptor. And if they are abnormal or mutated, then it drives the cancer cell to become more prolific and more dangerous. But a simple tablet for EGFR, such as erlotinib, gefitinib, now dacotinib, and even osimertinib, can block that. And for ALK, crizotinib can block that. But this patient was negative for both of them. And we were at loss of word of what our option, the standard being chemotherapy, which we did give to her. But while we were doing chemotherapy, we sent a tissue to a test for something called next generation sequencing. Now, what this technology really is that we extract the DNA from the cancer cell embedded in the paraffin block. So the biopsy block is taken, the DNA is extracted and amplified, and then it runs through a machine which looks at all known abnormal DNAs in the whole sequence of the abnormal cancer cell. It comes up with answers, as in this patient, of finding 3 abnormalities, ROS1, P53, and a CDKN2A, along with not finding KRAS and EGFR. And therefore, what that means is that this testing was able to find something which is an abnormality, like that lock and key, and we have a key for. The key was called crizotinib. So we started this patient on 1 tablet twice a day. And do remember, she came with opposite side lung, brain, liver. This is a classical example of a patient we would have not expected the patient to survive beyond a few months. Now, the reason why this is being spoken about so much is because unlike before, where we used to have only 1 or 2 mutations, we are finding EGFR, ALK, ROS1, but we are finding others as well. We are finding HER2, MET, PI3K. Recently, BRAF has been a very important marker. We have 2 patients at MaxAcell where all therapies were thought to be wasted, but we put them on the inhibitor of this, and at 6 months, both of them have had a very good scan. So this number is going from 20% who needed targeted therapy to 30 to 40 to 50. And as you can see that between KRAS and oncogenic, about 56% patient can't get a therapy, all the others can. And my guess is by the time we come back and speak about this year on year, we will see this number will become maybe 70, 75. And all we know, 100 one day. 18 months later of starting crizotinib, she has a slight headache. And for this 18 months, she is very well. PET and MRIs are successively shown no disease. So she went from a metastatic disease to no disease, but 18 months later presented with headache. MRI showed 7 new lesions as compared to 6 months ago, no lesion 6 months ago. And the largest was 1.2 centimeter. The PET, however, did not show cancer back in the bone and the liver and the adrenal. So it was a brain only increase in cancer on a patient with the ROS1 mutation on crizotinib. So lock and key, classical, but failed in the brain. Now we, in fact, at our center has now about 5. This is in the case of 4 of these patients. This was the average pace with ROS1 mutation. It was almost equal male-female divide. Most of them were not smokers and they were good performance stations. Dr. Suryakant really emphasized that and we agree to that. And we started crizotinib all these patients. And this is this patient, 18 months, but one of them continued to do well. Other managed for 2 years and one for less than roughly a year and for 18 months. We gave serotinib to these patients and you can see that we added 12 more months, right? So this patient who came 18 months later, we started serotinib and we added another few years to life. So this was 2015. So we had 2 years and then we had another 2015 diagnosis, and this was 5 years ago. So we are already saying 8 years of therapy has been added, and I already have a treatment which can be started next. And I'm guessing if she progresses soon, we'll have another few years added. This is a great example of how in 1970s, the average survival with surgery alone or radiation for metastatic was less than 2 months. And we can see as therapies were added, this became average of 2 years in metastatic cancer. And my guess is this will become average of 4 to 5 years because this technology is changing so rapidly. And we are now doing more targeted therapies. We are doing more lock and key. And for patients who don't get that, we're doing more immunotherapy. And we are now reaching a stage where we're looking at new therapies and combining them. And by the time patient fails one, he's over to the next. However, these patients do fail. So thank you for this time. And I really appreciate the communication here. But I'll pass on to Dr. Charu with a very interesting question that if a patient comes with a single brain metastasis at least, can you see the patient in the morning, send them home by evening, having treated with the cancer end to end? Dr. Charu?
Yeah, so that is what you do, Nitish. Morning, give us a call. Patient is coming, treat and send them back. As most of the patients, they are, from outside Delhi.
Yeah, this one was from Agra. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. So next slide. So this is a patient who is a resident of Agra, 64-year-old, and with the comorbidities of diabetes and hypertension. Next slide. So she was investigated for a right lower lobe mass on chest X-ray in April 2016, and after clinical examination, biopsy confirmation, and a complete metastatic workup, she was staged as stage 3A adenocarcinoma, treated with neoadjuvant chemotherapy and then surgery. And after that, she was on follow-up. Now what happens is, now this in the COVID times, we get a call that she got seizures. So she was advised to get an MRI brain done there only, and which showed a ring enhancing lesion on the MR on the right. You can see she got a whole body PET CT done there only, and there was no evidence of uptake anywhere else in the body, just this tissue, just this lesion. And the patient was advised for a biopsy or a neurosurgery, but patient was not ready to get it done. So the patient landed up, now here we have got two options. We can either give whole brain radiation to the patient, which is a minimum of at least 2 to 3 weeks of treatment with its side effect, or we can offer this patient SRS. So basically SRS is stereotactic radiosurgery, like similarly what we talked about SBRT in lung. So this is what SRS is in brain. So this can be done with an X knife or a gamma knife, and it is a high precision therapy, as you can see here. This prevents the side effects of the whole brain, and it is a single day procedure and does not delay the systemic therapy. So in case if the patient has to be given systemic therapy, the patient within a week can start on that. So here you can see the one marked in yellow is our motor cortex, and the lesion is lying just next to it. So this is how we delineate on the fused MR and the CT scans. And here you can see how precise we are. Yeah. So this is the 100% isodose line. You can see it is just confined to the lesion, and the 50% isodose you can see is hardly to the tune of 2 to 3 millimeters. And this is how we started the treatment in the morning, delivered in the evening, sent back her the same day, and MRI of July 2020 shows marked regression of the patient. And these are the sites where, you know, SBRT can be easily delivered: brain, spine, lung, liver, adrenal, lymph nodes, and bones in a matter of, you know, 2 to 5 or 1 fractions, and patient can be immediately taken up for then systemic therapy. And Nitesh, if you can recall, we had a patient who went onto a Europe tour. We gave him SRS
Yes.
thrice, and he was
Yes.
CA lung with some
Yes.
on immunotherapy. And after the second SRS, he said he has to go on a Europe tour, and we did send him on Europe tour.
Yes, yes. We
Right?
get all these lovely
Yes.
requests, and we obliged to meet them. In fact, he was from Lucknow, so I think this is something what UP and us, that we get the patient from UP saying you have to do this, and we oblige, thankfully. So thank you for that, Charu. Really, I think this has been fascinating from all the way of talking about radiation in lung, which is so precise, to radiation in brain, which is even more difficult area, but not only precise, without toxicity, very relevant. And I'll hand it over back to Dr. Harit and Dr. Suryakant and the esteemed panel to take up any question answer that may be there.
Thank you, Nitesh. Thank you. We had few questions on the chat going in between. If there are any more questions, we'll be happy to take. Mainly few questions about the EBUS or about the mediastinoscopy and frozen section. So obviously very little scope of that, but we do ROSE for all EBUS patients. Dr. Naveen had discussed about that, so that we know where to stop and how far to go for sampling. And for mediastinoscopy, sometimes we do frozen if there's some unusual doubt, but otherwise we sample the stations and wait for the final histopathology. Dr. Sudhir, any comments? And Dr. Anand? Sir, Dr. Sudhir? Sir, aapka? Yes, sir.
I just have two small questions. One
Yes,
from Dr. Shubham, whether mediastinoscopy is a daycare procedure, or does patient need to stay in a hospital for a day or two for the procedure and after the procedure?
Dr. Anand, we keep the patient, if we have admitted just for a mediastinoscopy, we keep the patient admitted for a day. Preferably, the patient needs to be admitted because it's an OT procedure, and the anesthesia involved. We obviously want to take care because it's a very high risk area considering the blood vessels. But otherwise, if things are smooth, 1 day's admission is good enough.
And another question from Dr. Charu. Is there any specific contraindication to SBRT, or does it have to do something with the performance status of the patients while going for SBRT or other such procedure?
So the thing is, as such, there are no contraindication to SBRT. We have treated patients who have got a FEV1 of as low as 40% also. And in these patients, we have treated even without, FNA or biopsy, where, the radiologist tells us in case if they go in to do a CT guided FNA or biopsy, the patient would, land up with a huge pneumothorax or some other complication. So as such, there is no contraindication to SBRT because we don't need any anesthesia and it is a non-invasive procedure. And age
but
and
larger lesions are not eligible, Charu, is that
so,
right?
So
Very
I mean,
limited
less
to
than
small
4
lesions.
centimeter. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's only for small lesions, very small lesions.
Yeah.
And any relation with performance status of the patient, whether he is able to take care of himself or
So normally if I can remember, we have done it till a performance status of 3, not beyond.
That's right.
Okay. Right, sir.
So generally, yes, sir.
No, nothing, sir. I do not find any more question from anybody. So last comments from yours.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And I think it has been one wonderful step in the right direction, because now I think we can take off to more meaningful and engagement. And as Nitesh and Dr. Chaudhary can take over and create some such software, some module which makes life easy for all physicians. And every big thing has a small beginning. I always believe that just keep pursuing and relentlessly, and things change without much realization. So I am very hopeful and positive that we'll come out with something more strong and long lasting. And NALCCon, we should be able to showcase something to the pulmonology world together, that what together we can do. And we look forward for an amazing participation from UP State chapter, Indian Chest Society chapter, UP State.
Sir, I like to percolate down this. I'll put it on the group. And I think what we are doing is we are putting a very heavy 1 lakh rupees for best oral presentation, but we are putting that because we know that there's a lot of very good quality work happening, and we are prompting people to take out their good work, put it on a poster, and be very widely distributed through this conference. So we know there's a lot of good work happening in India, but we want to give it the right platform.
Absolutely. सर आपका ऑडियो नहीं बंद है सर. हेलो डॉक्टर चौधरी, आपका ऑडियो बंद है, अभी आया नहीं. Not able to hear you.
I need, sir.
I is not able to hear you. हाँ, ऑडियो तो ऑन है. Something happened to the mic. I think something wrong with the mic. So we'll catch up over phone later on. And I think with this, we'll close. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you
very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.